Talking about cut flowers, I'm going to be pretty quick because I've got a lot of information. And so again, please feel free to ask questions as I kind of breeze through these. And a lot of this info is just going to be you looking back at it later and getting like the names of stuff. So mostly I'm just here to pinpoint some special fun things from each slide. So let's talk about the cut flower garden. We're going to talk about keys to success, cut flower types, the types of producers. I'm going to give you a little bit of a four season if you're the type of person who would like a pretty garden all year, as well as some harvest tips and some good resources that I like to recommend to people. So, keys to success. If you've been on any of these, I'm sure you've heard the first one before, and it is to take a soil test. All right, that's going to be very important. The good thing is that flowers, typically, most of them are not what we call heavy feeders, like a tomato would be. And so they are great going in after a vegetable garden, because they are going to scavenge and be great scavengers for nutrients that have been left behind from that garden. So they don't need a ton, but there are some that need more than others. Sunflowers, because they're so fast and they put on a lot of bulk, are going to need a lot more nutrients than something like a zinnia is necessarily going to need. But still, in comparison, a lot lower than tomatoes. We don't recommend overhead watering. Of course, you can't control the rain, as we well know, but if you can help it, don't overhead water. So soaker hoses are your friend. And if you need to overhead water, do it when you don't have bloom. So young plants, it's okay to overhead water them if you're still working out that irrigation. But soaker hoses, drip irrigation is the way to go. And you're getting that, much more efficient watering that way as well. Like I said before, flowers are great at scavenging for nutrients. You don't want to overfeed them. So remember, the bloom is what we're after here 99% of the time, although we're going to talk about some foliages. So if you overfeed them, especially with nitrogen, you can get more foliage than you do flowers. And so and the name of the game here is definitely don't overfeed. Let them find that nutrients and make sure, it's not disappearing into the groundwater. If you want straight stems, if that's really important to you, which is not for everybody, which is totally fine, but if you want straight stems, you need to have netting. Unless you're in some special area where, you don't get any wind movement at all, which that's a whole other issue there. But you want straight stems. Even in high tunnel production, people are going to use some sort of netting or trellising because the plants will get really tall, okay? And we don't want them bending over and we get these really curvy stems. For some people, they enjoy that, but for production, if you plan to make bouquets, that's not the name of the game. And then we're going to talk about these foliages, fillers, and statement flowers, some of my favorites, some of the easiest ones to start with, and how to incorporate them. But if you want a true cut flower garden, you need a little bit of everything. Trust me on that. You'll get a much better product if you have a little bit of everything. So talking about the types of cuts, there's bulbs, corms, and tubers, biennials, hardy annuals, and tender annuals. I'll talk about the difference sort of in those if you're not familiar. Perennials, in cut flowers, we tend to divide woodies out of perennials. So when we talk about perennials, we're talking about herbaceous ones like a peony, for example, versus woodies, we might be talking about mock orange or lilac or some of the foliages in there. So we do kind of tend to pull them out, those woodier stems. And vines and foliages, there are perennial foliages and annual foliages. Again, I kind of pull those out just for kind of ease of understanding in there. So talking about bulbs, corms, and tubers, these are often known as the exclamation points of the garden. And so they are usually the most bold. And for spring planted, so you're planting them now for, summer and fall blooming. Dahlias are, of course, a big one. I've done a dahlia talk on here before. I know there's been a couple, but also lilies, gladiolus, tuberoses are all good examples of a bulb, a corm, or a tuber. And then fall planted, some of these can be early spring planted. And by early spring, I mean more like late winter. But with the way our climate has been, we've just moved to zone 7. Most of these are actually better in the fall. If you can give them a little more production, you're going to get more bloom out of them. So tulips, of course, one that we know really well. Fritillaria, if you're not familiar with fritillaria, there are several different species that look very, very different. Even though they're all fritillaria, you'd never guess that they're related. highly recommend you looking at into those if you like very interesting things in the garden and some nice interesting colors. Persica is like a dark, it's almost a black, and it's shaped sort of like a snapdragon with multiple blooms on it, and it is stunning and lasts a very long time in the vase. Daffodils, you know, are fancy narcissus. Daffodils aren't what they used to be. There's a lot of awesome ones out there these days, so highly recommend you checking those out. Apricot whirl is one of my favorites. Hyacinths, you can get some that have a longer stem length for cuts, making small little, you know, bud vase type things, and so they're just lovely with a lovely scent to them. And then ranunculus and anemones are the ones people get really excited about. And I used to have these in the spring planted section. If you want to kind of set them and forget them, plant them in the spring and early spring, March, and in an area that they're not going to get too much water. But if you want the best production of them, you need to give them a little bit of protection with some frost fabric or some plastic to create kind of a little greenhouse effect, and put those in the fall. And they will overwinter and start to bloom early March, mid-March, depending on how the weather is in that area. And so you're going to get much better product fall planting those. For biennials, these do have a trickier growing cycle when we think about it from a cut flower perspective. They're not tricky from a botanical perspective because, you know, they just put on foliage one year and they flower the second year, typically. Sometimes you get a little lucky, but typically it's the second year. So that's something to think about. If you really want foxglove, the traditional old-fashioned foxglove, or lupine or something like that, plant them in an area that you know is okay, that they don't bloom and they're not going to take up space this year, and then they'll bloom again, or they'll bloom that second year. And these are really great because they bridge this really awkward gap we tend to have in production of late spring to early summer. So right now is when our biennials and our perennials are blooming, and so they can be really great. So these ones you're going to plant in late summer ideally, and then they will put on some foliage and they will set seed, so they'll go to flower and set seed the second year. Canterbury bells, there are some annual versions of these. Foxglove, there are some annual versions of these as well. Dalmatian series is the one that you can get, you know, plant in the spring. They're blooming by, you know, bloom in the first year. Sweet and William, same way. There are perennial and biennial versions of those, and there are annual ones. So Amazon series is coming to mind with those as an annual. Lupine, I have tried to push it as a first year, but as far as I know, it is a true biennial, but it is worth the wait, but it does not like it hot. So put it in an area that maybe stays a little bit cooler. And then, of course, we all know, you know, Queen Anne's lace, Ami. There's some versions of that are cut flower, and hollyhocks are true biennial that a lot of people like in a cut flower garden. As far as what I call and refer to as hardy annuals, you'll also hear them called cool flowers, and that's not just because they're awesome, it's because they like cool weather. So there are cool annuals. They just like the cold. And so these ones will do best. And trust me, I have tried to do them from seed, as far as growing them in plug trays. Take a load off yourself, make your life easy, and sow them directly into the garden in the fall. They will make a clump of foliage. So, you know, if you're sowing them in September or October, depending on where in the state you are, that's kind of your timeline. You're sowing them in there, and then they will create a clump of foliage probably by December, and they will, with little to no protection, most of these will make it through as this tiny clump of foliage, and they will be blooming, you know, right now, basically. So over the past month, April into May, they'll be blooming depending on the heat. And so larkspur is a really great example. It does not like to be grown from seed in a tray in your home or in your little greenhouse. You got to direct seed it and it will be fine. It takes the cold. It is an easy one. Bells of Ireland can be a little bit tricky to direct seed into the ground, but it is possible. And it is hard to start from seed in a tray. Snapdragons are an easy one. Nigella, which is what's pictured, also called Love in a Mist. Mine is starting to bloom right now at home from what I sowed in October. Bupleurum is a greenery, but also has a little bit of a gold bloom on it. Agrostemma might be new to you. It's also called corncockle. It is gorgeous little white bloom, gets really tall. great for bouquets, and calendula is a good one. And, you know, if you like to make teas or herbal things, calendula, you can pull double duty, making a salve, but also having it as a cut. So those are fun. And then what we call the tender annuals, or the warm season annuals, are the ones most people know the best. And these are your workhorses in the flower garden. They're the easiest, they're the cheapest, and they're the fastest growing, because they got to get everything they need done between like May and September, and so, you know, even faster than that. So zinnias, of course, are a great one. Lots of excellent varieties out there. If you need specific, you know, things about those, feel free to throw that in the chat. If you want specific varieties, I can recommend, but there's not a bad zinnia in the world. Celosia, there are so many types. They are one of my most favorite. So pictured here is like a coxcomb variety, but there are plumes, wheat versions, and they come in a lot of big colors. A lot of great breeding has been done in celosias. Nicotiana is flowering tobacco. And if you really like scent, if you have an area off of your, you know, a porch you sit on in the evening or something outside, plant Nicotiana close by, because it releases that scent in the coolness of either the early morning or the evening, and they smell excellent, and you will get lots of hummingbird moths and hummingbirds that like Nicotiana. So highly recommend them. Cosmos, of course, we know. Sunflowers, you can do branching or single stem. And the single stem are often pollenless, which is great if you're putting stuff on your table. And then straw flower, especially if you like to dry things, but they're great fresh as well. And marigolds, some people love them, some people hate them. I am in the marigold lover version, so I'm all about that. And there's, again, lots of different shades these days of marigolds, from ivory to more of a burgundy color. So it's not just the orange marigold it used to be, even though no shame in that one as well. For those herbaceous perennials that I like to recommend for people, and remember, these are going to reach maturity at 3 to 4 years. So we usually don't recommend cutting on them until year 3. But, you know, if you sneak a stem here and there in the first 2 years, nobody will judge you for it, because sometimes you just can't help yourself. But again, these bridge that awkward gap between what the fall sown and the spring. So you've got peonies, which in my area of the state, Central Kentucky, are blooming right now. Iris are a great one, and actually do make a good cut flower if cut at the right time. Hydrangea, of course, there's lots of different varieties. Veronica, there is a native version as well as a lot of cultivated ones, and pinks and purples and whites is usually what we're looking at there from colors. And so they're a beautiful spike, and they bloom for a pretty wide range of time. So like those a lot. Yarrow, lots of cool things happening in yarrow. Again, we have native varieties as well as some cultivated ones. And so lots of different range in color with yarrow these days. And there's a big fluffy white one that I am growing this year that I've not grown before, so I can't report yet on it, but it's called the Pearl, and it is really fluffy, and it's a yarrow. So in theory, it should be easy, but we'll report back. Coneflower, Rudbeckia, pictured is Sahara is that one, and I love these kind of frilly autumn tones that it lends itself to. And then of course phlox. I love phlox. Get you a good mildew resistant one is what I would recommend, and they're an excellent cut flower if cut at the right stage. For woodies, again, they're a perennial, but I pull them out. And so these ones will have either beautiful fillers or beautiful flowers or foliages. Sometimes they have berries or seed pods. And so these ones can really be the good backbone. You can incorporate these into your landscaping, but you can also cut on them. So it's a dual purpose here. Viburnum, there's not a bad viburnum in my book. Okay, I love them. I love all of them. If you don't know what a plant is, it's probably a viburnum. That's what I have always thought. So pick one. They're all great. I do recommend, I've skipped this, but I do recommend buying bare root and planting in the fall over a potted one. It's not to say that the pot is bad necessarily, but your bare roots are going to be cheaper. And they are going to take off really quickly if you plant them in the fall at the right time. So, you know, if money wasn't an issue, I'd tell you to go buy the potted ones, and that'd be great. But these ones, bare root is definitely a lot cheaper. So, you know, you can get 2 or 3 instead of just 1. And 9 bark, one of my absolute favorites. the wine colored ones, and there's a couple varieties of those. There's also a chartreuse. If you've not seen it, it is excellent. It's beautiful this time of year especially, and it's just that bright chartreuse in a bouquet is chef's kiss. And again, a great landscaping plant there, very disease resistant, and is a native. Beech trees. So if you're wanting to plant some trees in your landscaping, you can plant a beech tree. And so the dark purple beech, any color is fine, but the dark purple is excellent, and it lasts out of water for a long time. So if you think you might want to make a cool wreath or something like that, beech can be a great one to go with. Mock orange, Philadelphus, which is what's pictured here, starting to bloom right now in my area of the state. And it is, just beautiful in arrangements, these big, plumes of white flowers on them. Wigelia is a good one, and again, blooming right now, and lots of different colors, lots of different shapes and sizes of that one. Excellent cut flower, great filler. Lilac speaks for itself. And then for later or either early spring or some winter interest, that the pussy willow and forsythia are both great ones. Let's see, doing okay on time. So for vines, if you have space for them, they're kind of the last thing that I personally think about because they're not the bulk of your bouquet, but they will add interest to it and they can add some movement. And so if you really want to take any designs to the next level, vines can be a great way to do that if you have the space for them, because they do need trellis. They are very vigorous. Hops actually are a great one. Hops are pretty, and you can dry those and again use them in wreaths and things like that. Clematis, there is a bush clematis now, rain dance, and there's another variety. Love the bush one. It's a lot easier to deal with, but again, just something pretty you can incorporate into a landscape naturally. Lebanon puff is an annual, and it looks like little Chinese lantern puffs, so they're just something cool to add. Bittersweet, I have an asterisk beside because I want you to use the native bittersweet, the American bittersweet, because the Asian one is very invasive. And so that is my little asterisk for you. Don't say that I didn't say it. Sweet pea, there are annual and perennial versions of this as well. And then our native honeysuckles. A lot of people are haters on honeysuckle. There are good native ones, so they can also be used. Pictured is hyacinth bean, which is a great annual, very vigorous, very pretty, dark, that dark purple stems, great on a arbor or something like that. For foliage, this is both annual and perennial in here. The way my brain works, this is how I pull them out. So witch hazel is a great one. And you can get great winter interest with those blooms in February. But the foliage is excellent to use in bouquets, especially in spring when you don't have a lot of options. Thornless raspberry, Joan Jay is a great one. That's a thornless raspberry. And so you get kind of double bonus. You can pick the foliage, and as long as you don't pick it clean, you get berries. And so, you can be snacking while you're, providing foliage. So it's a win-win. Mint, another asterisk here, because mint is very aggressive, which probably most of you know that are on here. Apple mint is the preferred one for cut flowers because it is the tallest and it's kind of got a nice thick stem in comparison to something like a spearmint would. But you could certainly use any of them that you like. Pineapple mint is a variegated one that I like a lot. But apple mint is lovely, and it does smell like apple. But put it in an area you're going to mow around or put it in a pot, and then put that pot on concrete. Okay. Because it's serious. We mow around ours because of where we can put it, like in a field basically, and we bush hog around it, and it still creeps out several feet in all directions, and we mow it down, and at least it smells good when we mow, but it's not going to do any damage being out there. Basil, my favorite is cinnamon and purple opal. A lot of people love lemon. Mrs. Burns lemon has won tons of awards with the American Society of Cut Flower Growers. Personally, don't love it, but I know so many people who do, so I always want to let you know about that. Cinnamon is by far my favorite and has the great length on it. You can use any of these for cooking, but they will not have the best flavor of basil like a Genovese basil, Italian basil will. Shiso is another one that is edible. I like the purple shiso, but there's also a yellow or not a yellow, a green that has purple undersides. It's very lovely, great foliage, also edible. Win-win. Eucalyptus, which is what's pictured here. You can grow this outside as long as you can give it winter protection. And so you can overwinter it. It will take pretty cold temps, but it will need some sort of plastic winter protection on it. And it will flush from, sort of like a crepe myrtle will flush from the base every year, or a fig. It's going to do the same thing. So you're never going to have trees if you're planting this outside, but you can have some great foliage later in the summer. Pokeweed. I know everybody just cringed, but pokeweed is a great foliage, but I like to use it for the berries. And so the green berries specifically, so you don't get the purple dropping and staining things. But yeah, there's I think it's Mayesh I've seen, which is an online wholesaler, sells pokeweed berries for like $20 a bunch. And so, there you go. I just gave you some good money making there. Scented geranium, you've probably seen like mosquito plant. A lot of people call mosquito plant or scented geranium that. There are a lot of, I'm a scented geranium connoisseur, so there are a lot of different varieties specifically for cut flowers. I like the apricot one, which is really lovely, and ginger are my two favorites, but there are tons of really great ones out there. There's really no wrong way to go. And fennel, again, another something that you can eat. Dill is one that you could use as well, but fennel, I like the bronze fennel because it's just really soft and pretty and an interesting color scheme to add in, and it is a perennial. All right, real quickly going through the types of producers here. It's important if you're gonna want blooms all season long. And so a lot of the things we just talked about fit into each of those categories. So what I call one-hit wonders, these bloom all at once. Think about when you're canning tomatoes, you want tomatoes that are gonna come on all at once. This is the same thing. So they bloom all at once for a big harvest, which means you've got to plant them or sow them directly about every 2 weeks if you want something consistent. Single stem sunflowers, Gypsophila, the annual version, which is baby's breath. Covent Garden is the one photo here. There is a pink version of this as well. Bombay celosia, it is a single stem celosia. So once you cut it, you're done. And Nigella, which is that made in the mist I told you earlier. And Snow on the Mountain, there's a couple other great ones out there. But these ones, if you want them consistently, you got to sow them often. For medium producers, these are very weather dependent. Usually you're getting 2 to 3 of these per season if you're going to sow them. Bachelor's buttons, Chinese forget-me-nots, Ami, which is a type of Queen Anne's lace, snapdragons, branching sunflowers, honeywort. Scented geranium is kind of going to come on later in the season when it's ready to be cut. You don't necessarily sow that one. It's going to come in as, you're going to put it in as a plug. And then your cut and come agains. Remember I told you those workhorses of the garden. So you usually can get 2 sowings here in Kentucky. You put your first round in May, and then another round in around late July, early August. And this will help you if you've ever had powdery mildew on your zinnias. This is a way to kind of get around it because you've got a fresh set coming on in the fall. Zinnias, cosmos especially, you can do basil. I don't, but you can. Dahlias, ageratum, gomphrena, marigolds, and celosia. These are going to be you put them in May, you might put another sowing in, but they're going to just crank out as many blooms as you can get to. And then just kind of finishing up, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I wanted you to make sure that you're aware of them and some options that you have, and you can look back on these notes and see. So for spring, I've given you some options for both annuals, woodies, foliages if it's applicable, but just some interest for all 4 seasons. So we've got spring, some really great ones, annuals and perennials. Moving into summer, again, some of those annuals, perennials. And my thought process here was always, it's a landscape, but it's a landscape you can cut from. And maybe you're putting some annuals in it in a traditional gardening sense, but you can also incorporate hydrangeas into your front landscape beds or something. And then fall is typically one a little bit harder for people to reach, to get bloom that time of year. So here are some good ones. Japanese anemones are what's here in the photo. Love them. They come in September, early October, depending on the weather. and they're just excellent and come in lots of different shades, pinks and things like that. Winter, probably the hardest one for people. Red twig dogwood or yellow twig dogwood are excellent. So beautiful against any snow that we get. Witch hazel, which is what's pictured here, we've already talked about. Nandina, I forget to put an asterisk here, but here's my asterisk here. If you are going to cut the berries off and use these in arrangements, then you're golden, right? It's the birds are not, it's not great for the birds for these to eat these. So if you're going to put one in the landscape that you know you're going to go out and cut those berries off and use them before the birds are going to get to them, then by all means go for it. But just be aware that, you know, that's something that you're responsible for. Golden cypress is a great evergreen that you can use and make your own Christmas wreaths or holiday wreaths with. Winter beautyberry is excellent one. Calicarpa, and it comes in white, purple, and like a orangey color, if I remember correctly. And there are American and Asian versions of that. Both are fine to plant. And then winterberry holly, which is your Ilex verticillata. It is a holly that loses all of its leaves, but you get these big clusters. So if you've ever seen like the Christmas berries, where they're just big stems of red berries or gold berries, that's winterberry. And it is beautiful, very simple all summer long, just a nice little foliage. But when fall and winter hit, it's excellent. And then lastly, I just want to talk about some harvest tips for you. You've got the flowers, now what do? And so always use a clean bucket and vase. And it's clean if you're willing to drink out of it. That's what I tell people. If you wouldn't drink out of that vase, you should not be using it for cuts. Always use clean, sharp clippers. So once or twice a year, at least, you should be cleaning those off, especially if you've got disease problems. Spray them off with a little bit of a bleach solution and then put some oil on them. Harvest during the coolest part of the day. Early morning is best, but you can do the evening if you're not able to harvest in the morning. Take a bucket or a vase of water with you to the garden. Even if you're just going, you're like, I'm going to go out there for 2 minutes. I'm just going to check to make sure something's working. The water's turned off. Inevitably, you will want to cut something. And so the best vase life is if you can immediately cut it and put it into water. Even if you're just bringing it right inside, it can make a difference for some flowers. Maximize stem length. And what I mean by that is you are not going to do the plant any favor by cutting a zinnia only, 6 inches long because you're worried about cutting off other buds. Cut deep down into the plant, harvest deep down in there, and then you will get nice long stems and a lot more stems moving forward. So you got to kind of be brave those first couple times and really cut them back hard. Make sure that you're not putting any leaves in water in your buckets or your vases. And it's typically best to allow them to rest before arranging them. So you pick them, you put them in a nice cool spot in the AC, and then an hour or two or the next day later, you can go in and arrange them. They'll be much more hydrated and happy that way. Recutting the stems when you arrange is, just so you open up those vascular bundles again, and then keep these flowers in a cool spot out of direct sunlight and away from fruit. Those are the keys there. Once flowers are cut, they do not want to be in the sun. So stick them for best life on a table somewhere. They're not going to get hit by any sunbeams. And then just the last thing I've got are some resources here for you, some books I recommend, some online free resources. You can, of course, always shoot me an email if you've got questions on things specifically. I'm more than happy to help with that. But that's all I got.